Carthage must be destroyed. We are going to continue with our video about the life of a miniature. I'm starting base coats today. I've got some really powerful lighting set up in my kitchen here on the kitchen island where I work. I don't have a painting desk, so this is what I use. The lighting might not look like much in the actual shot here, especially when he's black, because all the light's kind of reflecting off of it. But this is really good lighting for what I have here, and it helps me to paint a lot to have the most optimal lighting. So when you actually get to painting, make sure you have good light no matter what source. Make sure you have good light so you can see things and you don't have to squint and damage your eyes. This guy was primed last time. He's ready to start painting up, and I'm just gonna start right into this here and talk away. Here we have our Afghan Pushtun. He has his Giselle and his get up here. Now, before I start painting anything, I always kind of decide what colors I want to do, and I do a little research first. I've done some research and have thought and found in my research that a lot of white was involved with these fellows. They have apparently had white turbans, sometimes dark blue, and there's some other colors mixed in there as well. There would be in the 19th century, I think, but I'm going to paint this guy mostly a lighter blue color and also some whites. The colors I will end up using will be anywhere from, I've got some Vallejo paints I'll be using, and I'll also be using Citadel. I use both of those paints, and those are my main two paints. There's no right paint or wrong paint to use. You can use whatever kind of paint you'd want to use if you're new to base coating. There's so many options out there for acrylics. I just like these two brands. Now, I'm just gonna start painting and talk as I go. So that's basically how my setup would start. Now, you're gonna see here as I pop open my first paint, I've got it wrapped in saran wrap. Now, I find that Citadel's paints have an issue where if you don't take care of them, you can see they start to, I'm gonna say, crust up along the lid, and then they slowly become unclosable and they dry out really quick. So I have a lot of my, I don't know if it helps or not, but I have a lot of my Citadel based paints in saran wrap and plastic. I mean, I've got some on the side here all wrapped up. I don't know if that helps, but it kind of puts me, it puts my mind at rest to think that they're lasting a little longer. With, I'm just gonna shake it here. Remember, when you're base coating, you wanna shake the paint you're using quite a bit first. Well, quite a bit, enough that it works. But yeah, one advantage is if you have these ones with these kind of lids here. I think they're called the drop stops, I forget the name. But Vallejo lasts longer for me because the lid screws on nicely and it's a drop system. Whereas Citadel is using a pot system where you have to scoop the paint out, and that paint just gathers up, I find, in the lid. And if you don't often take them out or clean it, I often don't pay attention to it because I'm focused on painting, not cleaning, and then I end up forgetting to do that. So I protect them that way. I have a box here. I've got my paint palette here, which I don't actually use it so much anymore. I use it mostly for water, but I have this little this plastic Tupperware here, and I use it as my wet palette. You can get a professional wet palette, and I suggest everyone who is serious about painting go and get a wet palette, because that'll change your experience tenfold with painting. I used to just take paint and I would put it on my palette, add some water to thin it out, and you should always thin your paint. Sorry if you hear the dog in the background. You should always thin your paints out, and I use a wet palette for that, because and I'm not going to explain exactly what the wet palette does or acts for in this video, but the wet palette allows you to kind of control the life of the paint on a palette, you should say, because it stays wet. It won't go, how to say, again, sorry about the dog, it won't go dry, whereas on a palette that's not a wet palette, it's going to, one second. Sorry, I got my dog jumping in the background. So yeah, wet palettes. I would get one. I'm not going to get into how they exactly work or how they're set up here, but that's what I suggest getting. When you're mixing your paints, you always want to make sure you thin it out, and I always use the wet palette here. The wet palette adds some water to it. Some people say when you thin your paints, you should look for like a milk consistency when you're using different paints. but I don't really know what consistency. I've just done it so much that I have practice, and with different paints, I'll use different consistencies. So it's kind of like a practice and learn thing, in my opinion. There's lots of tutorials out there that'll tell you how much you should mix it or how much you should. No, sorry, I was off camera there. Got to remember that. I'm just doing base coat, so I'm gonna try and keep in camera as much as I can. You can see the color already coming on there, and I'm gonna do his robes white, and I think I'm gonna do his sash and his turban the light blue. Kind of have like a mixed color there. One thing with a dog, speaking of the dog running around, is you always gotta watch for hairs when you paint. Some people have this, you know, they might have to blow the hair off your paint sometimes. There's an aerosol can out there that allows you to blow hair off and stuff. I don't have that, so it's unfortunate. I don't have enough paint in my palette, but with the paint I'm using, Citadel has names on it. So you can see here that it says, I don't know if it's clear here from my angle, it says it's a base coat. Base coats, they say, in Citadel are meant to be the first layer of paint on top of a primer. And I'm using the old Citadel way of painting, where it's, you prime the model and then it's base coat, wash, layers, and highlight. I like painting that way, and that's how I paint everything. There's tons of other ways to paint. There's dry brushing, there's the new contrast paint method, which makes things really fast and good apparently. However, I'm not sure how to use that because I don't use it. I just kind of stick to the old guns. So, but yeah, I'm just gonna paint this guy along here and see how it goes. When I'm painting, I put a first really light layer on there. Let's see, I make sure it's in the camera there. I put a really light layer on and I let that dry, and then I keep building up layers, especially with whites, because whites on black need multiple layers. It's just, there's such a color difference. I try and keep central there. I really have to set up my camera better for the next video because I'm finding my hand keeps moving back and forth. But as I base here, as I add my colors, I just want to talk too about when you look at something like Citadel, and if you've been sold the Citadel paints, you don't have to use them as they're stated. Like, you could, if you have a lighter or darker color, mix it up and even use like a layer paint or a highlight, I guess a brighter paint as your base. And you'll see I do that too with some of their beards here. But yeah, I'm not a fast painter and I don't want to bore everyone, but I'm just gonna paint a bit and then film my progress and keep talking away here as I go on. So. All right, I got the first kind of layer on there. I'm gonna have to readjust my camera here because I can't really tell from the angle that I'm using. I don't have a camera in front of me, using my phone. So hopefully you guys can tell here that he's got one layer on there of white. I'm now moving to the fang. All right. Now when I'm painting base coats, some people say, make sure you fill in the lines. And what I mean by that is make sure you don't, don't get white on another spot. Keep within the area. White is supposed to be white. I don't worry about that on the initial coat because to me, the proper coat is more important than accuracy in the first go. I do a touch-up session before I do washes where I fix all the mistakes. So to me, I don't stay in front of the lines until I get towards the wash section, and then I'll go back and fix things. It's a long, tedious process, but that's just how I like to do it, so I don't make mistakes. I just put the fang down there because I'm gonna do the sash. I don't have, let's see again here if the camera's good. I don't have a specific order I paint anything in. I don't actually know if anyone does that, but I just kind of paint what I feel like painting as I go. So I started with all the whites I wanted to do there, and now I'm going to work on the turban. And I was going to say, if I'm using a Citadel brush here. I don't know what kind it is because it's faded, but I tend to use I don't want to say the highest quality brushes out there, but I don't use the lowest quality. I like to use kind of a mid-range, and to me mid-range means that I'm looking at Citadel's paint brushes and some stuff by Windsor. Not the expensive Windsor ones, but like I use their watercolor line, which surprisingly works really well for painting. Acrylics. I like to use for base coats the bigger brushes because you want to cover more area, whereas when I get into layering and highlights, I'll go into the lower brushes. Or if I'm doing their eyes, I'll use that small, not lower brushes, but smaller brushes. Hoping this quality of the video turns out good. It's hard to paint. Like I can paint and talk about abstract things, but when you're actually talking about painting, it's interesting because you're kind of trying to explain your process without telling everyone how to do things. Because this is the life of a miniature. This doesn't necessarily mean I'm doing it the way everyone else does it. This is just how I go about doing it. All right, I'm just thinning my paint out with water. One thing I always do too is I always take excess paint off the brush. I wipe it on my paper towel there. As for brush direction, when I do base coats, I try to follow one direction. I don't have a specific direction that I follow necessarily, but when I get to layering later on, I try to make sure paint flows as much as it can in just one direction, and like I'll go only downstrokes in one area just to have a consistent looking layer. But when it comes to doing base coating, I'm not really into worrying about that too much, as long as everywhere is fairly covered, and I try to keep up as much as I can to it. And I mean, even now I can tell you here, there's some details I need to go really close up to see. But for this part of the video, I won't. I'm just focusing on getting base coats on. So you can see I got my blue going there. I'm gonna let it dry again. Eventually, and it won't take long, within probably 10 minutes or so, I'm gonna go over the whites again until I get a good consistent layer, because right now you can see some of that black primer popping out. I don't want that. So I'm gonna go over it again, and I'll show you guys the results here. Next, I'm doing Bugman's Glow for the skin. It's a nice kind of tan looking color, and when you highlight it, you get some dark sections in the recess. I think it looks pretty good for soldiers, and I use it for everyone, unless they are like from the north or something. I kind of look at it as like a Mediterranean or mountain man skin tone, I guess, if you will. So let's give that a good shake. So far I've put Ricarth's Flesh, Bugman's Glow, and the Fang on this model. And you can see I got multiple colors in my little wet palette here that I made. And that's because I've been painting other guys. I just want to do this base coats on this one guy, just to get through the steps of this part of the series. And I find that if you paint one guy, it feels like time just flies by, because you're only focusing on one man. Whereas if you're painting, I usually do 5 guys at a time, I find that it feels much slower. But when it's one guy, you're just kind of zipping through it. And like I said, I just want to get my bases done and on. So I'll paint this up and I'll show you guys the results of the skin. All right, I got the blue on. I'm gonna do his gun now with flat brown, and then I will use Citadel's Dryad Bark to do his. He's got a strap on here. And just so before I go, I don't know if you can see it. I'll have to get up again and show y'all. But you can see there's blue on his elbow there. That's what I mean by me not being careful. To me, the initial part is to make sure your base coats are nice and smooth, and then clean up after. That's how I do it. That's how I like to do it. So yeah, you know his elbow's blue. It won't be though when I'm done the base coats here. Alright, I went ahead and did, I don't know, you can see here now, I did his beard up in Skaven Blight Tinge. Got the sandals done too in Dryad Bark, as well as the strap, and the gun was flat brown, as I said, from Vallejo. Now I'm going to use some Citadel colors, some Citadel metals or I was gonna call it bolt gun metal, but that's a really old name now. I'm gonna use the lead belcher base, which is gonna be the most parts of the gun, and then I'm going to put some of the accents in with Screaming Bell. With metal paints, you really, really want to shake them because metals apparently have flakes inside of them. So when you're using metals, and if you need to shake paints, the metals are the ones you absolutely want to shake the most. What I do with my metals is I mix in a Vallejo medium, and I'll show you guys here what it is. So I mix my metal colors with a matte medium. Some people have told me not to do this because it makes it too, I guess, it flows too much. Let's push the camera back there. But I find that the matte medium kills some of the shine. I don't like metal to be too shiny. Maybe if I was doing medieval knights, but for like guns and stuff, or bronze, like on my Romans, I always add a drop of Vallejo matte medium to all my metals. So I've shaken this up for a while. I'm doing the Screaming Bell right now first. I should be doing the lead belcher first because it's a bigger area, but whatever. And I'll show you guys the results of that after. Okay, there is my first base coat layer on all the guys here, and you can tell that he doesn't look ready. He's got paint on his he's got blue paint on his elbow there. He's got brown paint and white paint up there on his strap mixed out of the lines. So I'm sure some of his beard and his gun are overlapping metal and hair spots that shouldn't be. But you know what? This is how I paint it. This is my first base coat. The important thing to me is to get the colors on where I want them. Now what I'll do, and I'm not going to film this whole process because it would take some time. Now what I would do is I will go over, you see how there's white stuff here, it's still thin, you can see the primer showing through. I'll put another thin layer over it now that it's dry, and I'll do that with all the paints. I'll basically repeat the process and I'll cover them all so they have a good covering. And I'll show you guys the results in the next video, at the start of the next video, when we talk about touch-ups and washing. But yeah, what I'll do now is that I will go over those thin areas. I mean, you can see some on the white and the browns, and some on the blue there. Make sure it's all good, and then I'll clean it up and make sure everything's in the lines and not overlapping. So that's my initial base coat. And I'll show you the second one here in another video. I'm going to close today's video with saying that when you're working, it's really useful, and this is going to look like a mess here, but it's useful to have a recipe. And you can see I've got Afghan tribesmen written down. I got all the colors I use from different companies and their names and their recipes essentially on how I paint them and where I paint them. I'll say things in there like what wash to use or not to use a wash or stuff like that, or where to dry brush. It's just useful to keep a kind of instruction or recipe book and write down the paint jobs that you do, because if you ever take a break from painting or paint something else, sometimes you'll forget what you painted something, especially when you have a lot of models. So it's just a useful thing to do, to write down what you're painting and how you're painting, no matter you use the Citadel setup or you use another setup, contrast paints or what have you. So yeah, in the next video, this guy's going to look a lot nicer and a lot cleaner for washes and touching up. So I want to thank you all for watching, and we'll see you on the next video. Have a good one.